My phone rang at 6:30 in the morning, and I answered it still half asleep, my father's coffee mug steaming quietly on the table beside me. "Sis, Dad died last night," my sister said, her voice flat, clinical, carrying none of the grief the words should have required. My name is Celestine Marchbanks, I'm 35, and I used to believe my sister's cruelty had limits. Right up until the morning, she tried to bury our father while he sat 3 feet away from me, very much alive. He left everything to me and my husband. Rosalind continued, not even pausing for my reaction. You get nothing. In the background, I heard my brother-in-law, Desmond, laugh, a short, satisfied sound, like a man closing out a bet he'd been confident about for years. Finally, he said, "You're out." I looked at my father, who'd raised an eyebrow at my sister's name lighting up my screen, his coffee cup pausing halfway to his lips. I put the call on speaker without a word, watching his expression shift from confusion into something colder, sharper, as he pieced together exactly what his eldest daughter was attempting. He leaned toward the phone, calm and deliberate. "Rosalind," he said quietly, "that's an interesting way to describe a man drinking coffee beside your sister." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I almost thought the call had dropped entirely. "Dad," Rosalind finally said, her voice cracking, all the cold confidence from moments earlier evaporating instantly. That's not possible." I'm very much alive," my father said, his tone measured in a way that somehow felt more dangerous than shouting would have. "Though I am curious how you managed to convince yourself otherwise this early in the morning." Desmond's voice cut in, panicked now. "Rosalind, hang up the phone?" "No," my father said firmly. "Don't hang up. I'd like to understand exactly what's happening here." I watched him set down his coffee entirely now, his hands steady despite the visible tension working through his jaw. This was a man who'd built a modest but comfortable life through decades of careful, quiet work, a life Rosalind had apparently decided to redistribute before he'd even finished breathing. "I can explain," Rosalind started. "You called your sister to inform her I'd died," my father said, "and to tell her, gleefully, that she'd receive nothing from my estate. I'd very much like to hear the explanation that makes that sound reasonable." Silence answered him again, heavier this time, thick with the particular panic of someone realizing their plan had collapsed in real time. "It was a misunderstanding," Rosalind finally said, her voice unsteady, grasping for footing that no longer existed. "Someone told me, I thought, Dad, I swear, I would never actually—" "You would never actually what?" my father asked. "Lie about my death to exclude your sister from an inheritance you've apparently already decided belongs entirely to you?" Desmond attempted to intervene again, his tone shifting into something placating, rehearsed. "Mr. Marchbanks, we've always had your best interests at heart. This is just a misunderstanding that got out of hand." "I've been married to your mother-in-law's sister's cousin for 30 years, my father said dryly, "and I've never once heard, 'We've always had your best interests at heart' precede anything honest." I sat quietly beside him, watching this unfold with a strange, detached calm, the shock of the morning settling into something closer to clarity. This wasn't the first time Rosalind had positioned herself as the more deserving daughter, the more present daughter, the one who handled things while quietly working to diminish my place in the family. It was simply the first time she'd been careless enough to do it with our father listening. "I want you both to come to the house," my father said. "Today. We're going to discuss this properly in person, without a phone line between us." The call ended in silence. They arrived 4 hours later, Rosalind's face pale and rehearsed, Desmond trailing behind her with the stiff posture of a man walking into a meeting he already knew he'd lose. My father didn't invite them to sit right away. He simply stood in the living room, arms crossed, studying his eldest daughter with an expression I rarely saw him wear, not anger exactly, but disappointment sharpened into something almost surgical. "Explain it to me," he said, slowly, "from the beginning." Rosalind's explanation unraveled quickly under pressure, contradicting itself twice before she abandoned the pretense of misunderstanding entirely. She'd assumed, she finally admitted, that given his recent minor health scare, a scheduled procedure 3 weeks earlier that had gone smoothly, it was only a matter of time. She and Desmond had simply decided to get ahead of the paperwork, contacting an estate attorney of their own to draft documents naming themselves primary beneficiaries, documents they'd hoped to have signed quietly before I ever needed to know they existed. "You forged paperwork," my father said slowly, based on the assumption that I'd be dead soon enough that I wouldn't notice. "It wasn't forged," Desmond said quickly. "It was drafted. In preparation. In preparation for my death," my father repeated. "Which you announced to my other daughter this morning as though it had already happened." Nobody had an answer for that. My father sat down slowly, the weight of the morning finally settling into his shoulders, though his voice remained steady when he spoke again. "I want to see this paperwork. Now." Desmond hesitated, glancing at Rosalind, before reluctantly pulling folded documents from his jacket. Drafted trust amendments, prepared weeks in advance, requiring only my father's signature to redirect his entire estate away from me entirely. My father read through them carefully, his expression unreadable, before setting them down on the coffee table with deliberate calm. "I built this estate slowly," he said, modestly. "Over 30 years, raising both of you, doing my best despite my own limitations as a father. I always intended to divide things fairly between you, regardless of who visited more often, regardless of who made more phone calls or sent more birthday cards." Rosalind's eyes filled with tears, though I couldn't tell anymore whether they were genuine or simply another performance calibrated for the moment. "I never intended to exclude your sister," he continued. "Not once. Not ever. And this morning, you didn't simply assume I was dead. You called to gloat about erasing her from a life she's been just as present in as you have, quietly, without needing recognition for it." He looked at me then, something gentler passing between us. "That ends today," he said. My father called his estate attorney that same afternoon, requesting an immediate meeting, his voice carrying a new firmness that hadn't existed in our family dynamics before that morning. Rosalind tried once more, cornering me privately in the kitchen while Desmond spoke quietly with our father in the other room. "This doesn't have to change everything between us," she said. "It was a bad morning, Celestine. People say things they don't mean when they're stressed." "You didn't say something you didn't mean," I said quietly. "You said exactly what you meant, clearly, coldly, and only stopped because Dad happened to be sitting beside me instead of in the ground where you assumed." She didn't have a response for that. For the first time in our entire relationship, my sister had no clever reframing available, no easy deflection to soften what she'd revealed about herself in a single unguarded phone call. The attorney arrived within the hour, and my father spent the following weeks revising his estate plans entirely, not out of spite, he told me privately, but out of clarity, finally seeing plainly what years of quiet favoritism toward Rosalind had allowed to fester unchecked beneath the surface of our family. "I should have seen this sooner," he admitted. "I'm sorry it took something this ugly to open my eyes." "You saw it today," I said. "That's what matters." Antes de continuar, note que este mensaje lego en español mientras el resto de nuestra sesión ha sido en inglés, solo confirmando que seguimos en inglés para esta parte, y que así está el resto de la historia. Continuando en inglés. Part 7. The revised estate documents took nearly 2 months to finalize, my father working through them with a precision that revealed just how seriously he'd taken that morning's betrayal. He didn't disinherit Rosalind entirely, that wasn't his nature, even now, but he restructured everything to ensure fairness neither of us could quietly manipulate again, with independent oversight neither Rosalind nor Desmond could influence. Rosalind grew quieter over those months, the confidence that once defined her replaced by something more careful, more uncertain. She'd built her entire identity around being the daughter who mattered most, and watching that assumption collapse in real time seemed to hollow something out in her she hadn't expected to lose. Desmond distanced himself gradually from family gatherings altogether, perhaps recognizing that his role in the morning scheme had permanently altered how my father viewed him. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The satisfaction I felt wasn't about winning against my sister. It was simply about finally being seen clearly, after years of quietly wondering whether my place in this family had ever been as secure as I'd hoped. My father squeezed my hand one evening, unprompted, watching the sunset from his porch. "I'm proud of the daughter who didn't need to raise her voice to prove her worth," he said. I let myself believe him completely. A year later, my father hosted a quiet dinner to celebrate his 70th birthday. The estate matters long since settled. The wounds from that morning slowly, carefully scarred over into something manageable rather than raw. Rosalind attended, subdued but present, our relationship rebuilt on smaller, more honest terms than it had ever existed on before. We weren't close the way sisters in movies are close, but we were honest now, which felt like its own kind of progress after years of quiet competition disguised as family closeness. My father raised his glass that evening, looking between us with the particular clarity of a man who nearly signed away fairness before catching himself in time. "I almost made a mistake this year," he said simply, "one I wouldn't have discovered until it was far too late to fix. I'm grateful every day that I found out the truth while I still had the chance to correct it." I thought about that 6:30 morning often in the months that followed. The phone ringing, my sister's cold, certain voice, my father's coffee cup pausing midair as understanding dawned. It could have ended so differently if he hadn't been sitting beside me, if I hadn't put that call on speaker. Instead, it became the morning our family finally saw itself clearly, for better and for worse.